Have you ever held a truth in your hands that was so volatile it felt like a live grenade? A truth that, once the pin was pulled, could obliterate the carefully constructed world of someone you were supposed to love? I have. For 3 days, that truth lived on a tiny memory card in my pocket, a digital ghost of a moment that changed everything. My name is Alara, and I have a peculiar habit. Some people collect stamps or vintage wine. I collect moments. Not in a scrapbook, not just in posed photographs smiling stiffly at the camera, but in their raw, unedited, and sometimes brutal honesty. My fiancé Ben calls them my memory catchers. They're a small arsenal of discreet, high-definition cameras, no bigger than a sugar cube, that I place in the corners of rooms during important events. He finds it eccentric, a little obsessive even, but he loves me, so he indulges it. He'll tap the top of a bookshelf as he walks by and whisper, "Get my good side, little guy." A private joke between us. I've never had to defend my hobby, but if I did, I would tell them about my grandmother. I would describe the slow, heartbreaking fog of Alzheimer's that rolled in and stole her from us piece by piece. First, it took the recent past, then the names of her children, and finally, the memory of her own husband's face. I watched her memories, the very essence of her life, fray and disintegrate into nothing. My cameras, my memory catchers, are my rebellion against that decay. They are my insurance policy against the fallibility of the human mind, my way of ensuring that the truth of a moment, the exact words spoken, the fleeting expression on a face, is preserved forever, incorruptible. Ben understands this. He held my hand through the last few years with my grandmother, so he never truly questions why I need to anchor my life with these digital proofs. This is why, in the week leading up to our wedding, my little cameras were perched like silent sentinels around the house we were using as a base of operations. And it's why I felt a specific, cold dread whenever Ben's mother, Margaret, was near. On the surface, Margaret was the perfect mother-in-law, effusive with her compliments about my dress, my taste, my love for her son. But underneath the saccharine praise, there was an unnerving chill. She had a way of rewriting history in real time, of insisting on conversations that never happened and promises I never made. Just last Tuesday, we were finalizing the seating chart. I had placed her sister, a woman known for her booming voice and inappropriate jokes, at a table near the back. Margaret watched me, a placid smile on her face. "Oh, Alara, darling," she'd said, her voice like honey. "I thought we agreed to put my sister at the family table. You said you found her so charming and wanted her right up front." She looked at Ben, her eyes wide with feigned confusion. "She told me that yesterday, didn't she, Benny?" I had never said that. We had in fact had the opposite conversation, but the way she said it, with such unwavering, gentle conviction, made the air in the room feel thin. Ben just sighed and mumbled, "Mom, we talked about this. Alara needs to seat people where they fit." His father, Arthur, who had been reading in the corner, didn't even look up. He just let out a long, weary breath, the sound of a man who had been running the same marathon for 30 years. It was in that moment, watching Arthur's quiet resignation, that a seed of an idea, a terrible premonition, took root in my mind. And I made a point to place one of my best memory catchers, the one with the clearest audio, on the mantelpiece in the room where my wedding dress would be delivered. The dress arrived 2 days before the wedding. It came in an opaque white garment bag, so large it felt like it contained a cloud. The delivery men carried it with a reverence usually reserved for priceless art, and I had them hang it from a high hook on the back of the door in the spare bedroom. The room with the mantelpiece. The room where my little camera was waiting. For a few hours, it was perfect. The door stayed shut. The dress was a secret, a promise waiting to be unwrapped. It was the one thing that was purely mine and Ben's, a symbol of the life we were about to start, untainted by family drama. But of course, nothing stays untainted around Margaret for long. She found me standing outside the room, just staring at the door. "Oh, there you are, dear," she chirped, linking her arm through mine. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Benny was just telling me the dress is here. You must let me have a peek, just a tiny one. I need to see the gown my boy's beautiful bride will be wearing." Every instinct screamed no. It felt like letting a wolf into a nursery. But how do you say that? How do you tell your future mother-in-law that you don't trust her near a piece of fabric? So I smiled, my lips feeling stiff, and opened the door. The air in the room was still. The white bag was a silent monolith against the dark wood of the door. "We're not supposed to unzip it until the day of," I said, trying to sound breezy. "Superstitious, you know." "Oh, nonsense," she scoffed, detaching from my arm and gliding towards it. She ran a perfectly manicured hand down the side of the bag. "I just want to admire the shape. It's exquisite, Alara. Truly, you have such wonderful taste." She turned to face me, her back to the dress, her smile a little too wide. "You know I had a lace dress too." Arthur adored it. I still have a piece of it, tucked away, memory. She paused, her eyes clouding over with something that wasn't nostalgia. It was sharp, possessive. Sometimes memories are all we have left when things change. The words hung in the air, a veiled threat wrapped in sentiment. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the afternoon. I needed to get her out of there. Margaret, would you like some tea? I was just about to make some. That would be lovely, dear, she said, not moving. You go on ahead, I'll just stay with it for a moment longer. Soak it all in. My heart hammered against my ribs. Leaving her alone with it felt like a profound mistake, but refusing felt like declaring a war one wasn't ready to fight. So I nodded, backed out of the room, and left her there. I left my dress, my beautiful, perfect dress, alone with her. I was gone for less than 5 minutes. When I returned with a tray, she was standing by the window, gazing out at the garden, humming softly. The room looked exactly the same. The white bag was untouched. She took the tea, thanked me graciously, and left. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It was a physical weight in my stomach. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I crept back to the room. I needed to see it. I needed to reassure myself that I was just being paranoid. My hand trembled as I reached for the long zipper on the garment bag. I pulled it down slowly. The scent of lavender and silk filled the air. And then I saw it. A dark, jagged stain, the color of blood or old wine, spread across the pristine white bodice like a spiderweb. At its center, the delicate, hand-stitched lace was not just stained, it was frayed, the threads severed as if they'd been deliberately, viciously pulled apart. My breath hitched. The world tilted. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. An execution. And in that moment, as a sob caught in my throat, I remembered the tiny blinking red light of the memory catcher on the mantelpiece. Before I go on, before I tell you what I found on that memory card, the truth that would either save me or burn everything to the ground, if you're finding your way to this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you can imagine, especially now. Okay. I took a deep breath, pulled the card from my pocket and slid it into my laptop. The file opened, and I saw her. The video was silent for the first 30 seconds, just a static shot of the spare room, the monolith of the white garment bag hanging on the door. Then Margaret glided into the frame. The camera perched on the mantelpiece caught her profile. She closed the door softly, and the click of the latch was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at the dress bag. The gentle, doting mask she wore for the world dissolved. In its place was something I had only glimpsed in flashes, a face tight with a bitter, consuming envy. Her smile was gone, her lips a thin, hard line. She was a predator, and my dress was her prey. She approached the bag, not with the awe she'd feigned for me, but with a palpable loathing. She didn't touch it. Instead, she began to speak, her voice a low, venomous whisper, not meant for any ears but her own. "Such a perfect little thing," she hissed, her eyes fixed on the silhouette of the gown. "So pure, so white. He thinks you're so different, so honest." She let out a short, ugly laugh. "Men are such fools. They see a pretty white dress and think it means a fresh start. Arthur thought that with me." Her voice cracked on her husband's name, a fissure of ancient resentment breaking through. "He thought he could wash away his mistakes with a wedding. But you can't. The stains always show. I made sure of that." My blood ran cold. This wasn't about me. This was a ghost story, and I had just walked onto its stage. She reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out 2 things. The first was a small, dark glass vial. The second was a little silver tool I recognized with a jolt. A seam ripper, premeditated, meticulous. This was not a crime of passion. It was an assassination. "Benny won't make the same mistake," she whispered, her voice hardening with a zealot's conviction. "I won't let him. He deserves a life without complications. He deserves to be mine." With a terrifyingly steady hand, she unzipped the garment bag. She unscrewed the cap of the vial and, with the precision of a surgeon, poured a dark, viscous liquid directly onto the center of the bodice. Then she took the seam ripper. The camera's microphone picked up the sound with horrifying clarity. The small, sharp snick as the metal tip pierced the delicate lace, followed by the sickening tearing sound of threads being severed one by one. She worked quickly, viciously, her knuckles white, pulling and ripping until the intricate pattern was a mangled ruin. When she was done, she stepped back, breathing heavily. She surveyed her work, a flicker of dark satisfaction on her face. Then, in a final act of chilling composure, she zipped the bag shut, smoothed her blazer, and took a deep, calming breath. The mask of the charming, effusive mother-in-law slid perfectly back into place. She turned to the window, ready for my return. I slammed the laptop shut. The click echoed the sound of the door latch in the video. The sob I'd been holding back died in my throat, replaced by something else. A glacial calm. The dread, the paranoia, the fear. It all all burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard certainty. I finally understood Arthur's weary resignation. I understood the marathon he'd been running for 30 years. She wasn't just rewriting history. She was poisoning the present to control the future. This wasn't about a dress anymore. It wasn't even about my wedding. She had just handed me the truth of her entire life on a digital platter. She had confessed to a crime far older than the one she'd just committed. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't just show this to Ben. He would be furious, hurt, but he was her son. He would want to manage it, to contain the damage. But this wasn't a fire to be contained. It was a cancer that needed to be cut out. The only person who could do that, the only one who truly needed to see this, was the man who had been her first victim. I had to show Arthur. But my resolve, so sharp and clear in the blue light of the laptop screen, began to waver in the dark hallway. Confronting Arthur felt like walking into the heart of a storm. What if he already knew? What if he was so beaten down that he simply wouldn't care? What if, in some twisted display of loyalty, he chose to defend her? The thought of him watching that video and then turning his weary gaze on me, asking me to just let it go, was more terrifying than the crime itself. I would be left completely alone, branded a troublemaker just days before my wedding. There had to be another way. A cleaner way, a way that didn't force me to be the executioner of a 30-year marriage. This was a crime, destruction of property, malicious, premeditated. The thought solidified into a plan. I would go to the police. I would file a report. I would let the formal, impartial system of justice handle it. I wouldn't be the accuser. I would be the reporter of a fact. I could take that sterile, black and white police report to Ben and Arthur and say, this is what happened. These are the consequences. It felt safer. It felt sane. The local police station was a small brick building that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The officer at the front desk looked tired. His shoulders slumped. He listened to my initial explanation. I'd like to report the destruction of private property, with a practiced air of disinterest. He took my name, the address, and the value of the dress, his pen scratching across the form. And who is the perpetrator? He asked, not looking up. My fiancé's mother, Margaret, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He stopped writing and finally looked at me. A flicker of something, pity, annoyance, crossed his face. Ma'am, this is a domestic issue. Are you sure you want to file a formal complaint against your future mother-in-law 2 days before your wedding? I have proof, I said, my voice gaining strength. I pulled the memory card from my pocket. I have a video of her doing it. She confesses to other things too. That got his attention. He led me to a small windowless room, and I slid my laptop onto the table between us. I found the file, took a deep breath, and hit play. I watched his face as he watched the screen. He saw Margaret's mask drop. He saw the vial, the seam ripper. He heard the hiss of her voice, the sickening tear of the lace. For a moment, I felt a surge of validation. He saw it. He couldn't deny it. When the video ended, he leaned back in his chair and sighed, running a hand over his face. Okay, he said, his tone sympathetic but firm. I see it. She did it. He paused. But here's the reality. The item is worth a few $1,000s, so it's criminal mischief, a misdemeanor. To press charges, we'd have to arrest her. An old woman in her own home over a wedding dress. A DA would likely drop it, tell you all to work it out. The video helps, but she could say she was emotional, that you provoked her, that it was a moment of weakness. It becomes a messy family drama that the court wants no part of. He looked at me, his eyes full of a weary pragmatism that felt like a punch to the gut. My advice? Don't do this. Don't start a war you can't win. Go home. Talk to your fiancé. This, he gestured to the laptop, to the police report form. This will only make everything worse. I left the station feeling hollowed out, the cold morning air stinging my face. The system hadn't just failed me, it had dismissed me. It had looked at Margaret's calculated, venomous act of sabotage and called it wedding drama. They saw a ruined dress. I saw a declaration of war. The officer's words echoed in my head. Don't start a war you can't win. But he was wrong. This was a war Margaret had started 30 years ago. I wasn't starting it. I was just the first soldier with a loaded gun. My cold certainty returned, no longer glacial but white-hot. There was no impartial system. There was no clean way out. There was only Arthur. I walked back into the house, the silence inside a stark contrast to the roaring in my ears. The police officer's pragmatic dismissal had been a slap, but it had also been a gift. It had burned away the last wisps of hope that someone else might fight this battle for me. The law saw a family squabble. I saw a predator who had been sharpening her claws on her own family for 30 years and was now turning them on me. My plan was simple. Find Arthur, show him the video, let the truth do its work. But first, I needed the laptop. I wouldn't let it out of my sight again. I headed for the small guest room Ben and I had claimed as our own, my steps echoing on the hardwood floors. The moment I pushed the door open, I knew the air was different, colder. A faint cloying scent of Margaret's Lily of the Valley perfume hung in the room. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. She had been in here, in our room, in my space. My eyes scanned the room, looking for what was out of place. Everything seemed normal. The bed was made, our bags were zipped in the corner. Then I saw it, the small antique wooden box on the nightstand where I kept my other memory catchers, my backups, and retired models. The lid was slightly ajar. A wave of nausea washed over me. I crept toward it, my hand trembling as I lifted the lid. It was empty. The velvet lining with its perfect little indentations for each camera was bare. Panic, sharp and acidic, clawed at my throat. Had she taken them, destroyed them? Then I saw them. On my pillow, arranged in a neat, mocking semicircle, were my cameras, 6 tiny dark cubes, their lenses staring up at the ceiling like dead eyes. They were presented for inspection. In the center of the semicircle, she had placed something else, something she had no right to touch, my grandmother's silver locket. It was the one thing I had of hers that was untouched by the fog, a piece of her I kept with me always. Margaret had been through my jewelry case. She had been through my most private, precious things. She wasn't just showing me she had found my cameras. She was showing me she could get to anything, that nothing was safe. This wasn't about a dress anymore. This was a violation, an invasion, a threat made in the silent language of carefully placed objects. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the sound ripping through the stillness. I snatched it up. An unknown number. It was a text message. Some memories are better left unrecorded. They can be so easily erased. The glacial calm I'd felt earlier shattered, replaced by a fury so pure it was almost blinding. This was her move, her counterattack. She knew I had the video. She was telling me she could play this game too. She was threatening to dismantle the very system I had built to protect myself, to turn my own insurance policy into a weapon against me. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway outside. Peeking through the blinds, I saw Ben's father's car. Arthur was getting out, alone, holding a suit bag. Ben must have sent him to pick up his tux. This was it. There would be no better time. The universe wasn't just giving me an opening, it was shoving me through it. I grabbed the laptop, my phone clutched in my other hand, the threatening text glowing on the screen. The locket and my little cameras still sat on my pillow, silent testament to the war Margaret had just declared. I walked out of the room, my purpose absolute. I wasn't just showing Arthur a video about a ruined dress. I was showing him the proof that the monster he had been living with was no longer content to stay in her cage. I met him in the downstairs hall. He had just hung Ben's suit bag in the coat closet and was turning to go, his shoulders already slumping in their familiar, defeated posture. He looked ancient. "Arthur," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He stopped and turned, his expression one of polite, tired inquiry. "I need to speak with you. Alone, it's urgent." A flicker of apprehension crossed his face, the look of a man who knows that urgent news is never good news. "Elara, I'm not sure now is the time. Margaret and I were just about to." "It's about Margaret," I cut in, my tone leaving no room for argument. "And it cannot wait." The fight seemed to drain out of him completely. He just nodded, a slow, heavy gesture, and led the way into his study. It was the one room in the house that felt like his, paneled in dark wood and smelling of old books and leather. He sank into the chair behind his large mahogany desk, gesturing for me to take the one opposite. I didn't sit. I walked around and placed the laptop on the desk in front of him, next to a neat stack of historical biographies. I took out my phone first. "She was in our room while I was at the police station," I said, my voice low and tight. I swiped to the picture I'd taken and laid the phone on his desk. He stared at the image of my little cameras arranged like a sacrificial offering around my grandmother's locket. He looked confused, his brow furrowed. "I don't understand. Those are my cameras. My memory catchers," I explained. "She found them, and she left me this." I placed my phone on top of the laptop and showed him the glowing text message. "Some memories are better left unrecorded. They can be so easily erased." He read it twice. The weariness in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawning alarm. This was not the familiar territory of seating chart squabbles. This was something else. "She's threatening you." It wasn't a question. "She's threatening to erase the proof of what she did to my dress," I said, and finally opened the laptop. "I'm so sorry to show you this, Arthur, but you have to see it. You have to understand what you've been living with." I hit play. I didn't watch the screen. I watched him. I watched as the mask of polite confusion fell away, revealing the raw structure of his grief under underneath. I watched as his hand, resting on a leather-bound book, slowly curled into a fist. I watched his breath catch when Margaret's voice, thick with venom, spoke of his own wedding, his own foolish hopes. Arthur thought that with me, the stains always show. I made sure of that. In that moment, I saw 30 years of self-doubt and quiet misery collapse into a single point of horrific clarity. The lifetime of her subtle gaslighting, of misremembered slights and rewritten histories, was suddenly illuminated. It wasn't his faulty memory. It wasn't his lack of attention. It was her. It had always been her. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Arthur didn't move. He stared at the black screen, his face a stone mask. The marathon runner had finally stopped, looked back, and realized the entire race had been rigged from the start. Slowly, he raised his head and looked at me. The weariness was gone. The resignation was gone. In their place was something I had never seen in him. A cold, terrifying stillness. The calm of a man who has lost everything and has nothing left to fear. "Thank you, Alara," he said, and his voice was a stranger's. It was flat, hollowed out, but utterly firm. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements deliberate. He picked up the laptop, holding it like a weapon. "Where is she?" he asked. My own heart was a frantic bird in my chest. "The sunroom," I whispered. "I think Ben is with her." "Good," he said, the word like a chip of ice. "He needs to see this too." He started for the door, his steps sure and heavy on the old floorboards. "It's time we all stopped pretending." I followed him out of the study and down the long, sun-drenched hallway, the laptop in his hand feeling like a ticking bomb. I could hear their voices now, light and happy. Margaret was laughing at something Ben said. Arthur didn't slow down. He reached the closed French doors of the sunroom, his hand resting on the brass handle. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound and terrible resolve. Then he pushed the door open. The laughter died in Margaret's throat the moment she saw her husband's face. Ben, who had been sitting opposite her on a wicker sofa, a half-smile still on his lips, turned to see what had silenced her. His smile vanished. "Dad, what is this?" he asked, his eyes flicking from his father's stony expression to me, hovering in the doorway. Margaret was on her feet instantly, her face a mask of wounded indignation. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this? You look like you've seen a ghost." She shot a venomous glare in my direction. "Benny, look, she's done something. She's been whispering poison in your father's ear." Arthur didn't even look at her. He walked to the glass coffee table between them and set the laptop down with a heavy, deliberate thud. He opened it. His movements were slow, precise, the movements of a man dismantling a bomb. "Sit down, Margaret," he said. His voice was devoid of all emotion, a flat, dead thing. "I will not," she snapped, her voice rising. "Not until you tell me why you're letting this girl upset our family right before the wedding." Ben stood up, placing a placating hand on her arm. "Mom, calm down." "Dad, what's going on? Alara, what did you do?" The question, the assumption that I was the instigator, was a fresh stab of pain. But it didn't matter. Arthur looked at his son, and for the first time I saw not paternal affection, but a deep, sorrowful pity. "Watch," Arthur said, his voice a command. He pressed the spacebar. The video began to play. The sunroom was silent save for the tinny audio from the laptop speakers. I saw Ben's brow furrow in confusion at the static shot of the spare room. Then his mother walked in. I watched Ben's face as Margaret's mask dissolved on screen, as her features hardened into that venomous sneer. He flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement, as if seeing a stranger wearing his mother's skin. Margaret stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her face draining of color. She was watching herself, her secret self, exposed in the bright afternoon sun. Then came the voice, her own voice, whispering her poison. "He thinks you're so different. Arthur thought that with me, the stains always show. I made sure of that." Ben took an involuntary step back from his mother, his hand falling away from her arm as if he'd been burned. His eyes were wide with a dawning, sickening understanding. He looked at Margaret, truly looked at her, and then back at the screen as her video doppelganger produced the vial and the seam ripper. The sound filled the sunroom, the sharp snick of the tool piercing the lace, the brutal, ripping sound of thread after thread being severed. It was louder now, more obscene than it had been when I watched it alone. It was the sound of a life's promise being torn apart. Ben made a choked noise in the back of his throat. He stared at the screen, at the vicious, methodical destruction of my dress, but I knew he was seeing more than that. He was seeing a lifetime of unexplained tensions, of his father's quiet sadness, of his mother's misremembered conversations, all snapping into horrifying focus. When the video ended, the laptop's fan was the only sound. Margaret, pale and trembling, finally found her voice. "It's a trick," she whispered, her eyes darting between her husband and her son. "She faked it. A deep fake. Benny, you know how clever she is with these things. She's trying to tear us apart." But the lie was hollow. It had no power here. Ben wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his father. Arthur slowly closed the laptop. He looked at his wife of 30 years, and the cold stillness in his eyes was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. 30 years, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying across the room like a death knell. 30 years of your little games, your little poisons. He gestured toward the laptop. You said the stains always show. You were right. He took a single step toward her, and she flinched. This stain, he said, is not on Alara. It's not on Ben. It is you. It has always been you. He turned, his back to her now. I'm done, he said, to the room, to the world. We are done. He walked past Ben without a glance, past me and out of the sunroom, his steps not weary, but light. The steps of a man just released from a life sentence. The sound of Arthur's footsteps faded down the hall, followed by the definitive click of the front door closing. The silence he left behind was a vacuum, sucking the air from my lungs. For a single, suspended moment, the three of us in the sunroom were a tableau of ruin. Margaret, a statue of disbelief. Ben, a ghost staring at the spot where his father had stood, and me, the architect of it all, my hands suddenly trembling. The white-hot rage of my mission extinguished, leaving only the cold, greasy ash of consequence. Then Margaret shattered. It wasn't a scream of anger, but a sound of pure animalistic panic. No, she gasped, her eyes wide and unfocused. She turned to Ben, grabbing his arms, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his shirt. Benny, he didn't mean it. It's her. She poisoned him against me. You have to go after him. Tell him she lied. Ben didn't move. He stared at his mother's hands on his arms as if they were snakes. He looked at her face contorted by a panic so complete it had erased any trace of the woman he knew, and he slowly, deliberately, pulled his arms free. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. I saw you. I heard you. That was the final cut. Seeing that she had lost him too, her panic curdled into a terrifying, focused rage. Her head snapped toward me. You, she hissed, her face a mask of pure hatred. You did this, you little snake. You brought your filth into my house, into my family. She lunged. Not at me, but at the coffee table, at the laptop. Her hands scrabbled for it, her intent clear, to smash it. To obliterate the truth, Ben reacted instinctively, grabbing her around the waist and pulling her back. She fought him, thrashing and shrieking, her voice a raw, ugly tear in the fabric of the afternoon. Let me go, I'll kill her. I'll kill her. The adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow. My knees felt weak. This wasn't a victory. This was a horror show. The woman screaming and fighting her son was not just a villain, she was a desperately broken person, and her unraveling was violent and absolute. The officer's words came back to me, a messy family drama. He had no idea. This was a detonation. Backing slowly out of the sunroom, I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I didn't call 911 to report a misdemeanor. I called to report a woman who was screaming death threats and physically attacking her own son. When two officers arrived, the screaming had subsided into ragged, hysterical sobs. Ben was pale, slumped on the wicker sofa, his head in his hands. Margaret was curled in an armchair, rocking back and forth, muttering under her breath. The scene was one of utter devastation. The lead officer, a woman with tired but intelligent eyes, approached me first. You made the call, ma'am? I nodded, my voice shaky but clear. Yes, Margaret, that woman there, she became violent. Violent over what? The other officer asked, his gaze sweeping the wrecked emotional landscape of the room. This was it. This was my chance to make the system see what I saw. She was threatening me. My fiancé had to restrain her. I took a breath and held up my phone, showing the officer the text message. Some memories are better left unrecorded. They can be so easily erased. She sent me this an hour ago after breaking into my room. Then my father-in-law confronted her with this. I walked to the table and opened the laptop. I didn't play the whole thing. I fast-forwarded to the moment Margaret produced the seam ripper. I hit play. The officers watched, their professional neutrality hardening into something more serious. They heard the ripping sound. They heard Ben's choked sob from the sofa. When I paused it, the lead officer looked from the screen to the sobbing woman in the chair. It was no longer a story about a ruined dress. It was evidence of premeditation, a clear motive for the threats, the break-in, and the violent outburst they had walked into. The messy family drama now had a clear aggressor and a mountain of tangible proof. She looked at Ben. Sir, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Did your mother physically threaten Ms. Vance? Ben lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and empty. He looked at his mother, then at me, and finally at the officer. He gave a single, desolate nod. Yes, he said, his voice hoarse. She did. That was all she needed. The system, which had been so dismissive before, finally ground into gear, not because of the value of a dress, but because the human damage was undeniable, happening right in front of them with a clear, recorded prelude. The war wasn't over, but Margaret's 30-year reign of silent terror had finally, loudly come to an end. They took Margaret to a hospital for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. The officer's term, not mine. The house, once a bustling hub of wedding preparations, fell into a silence so profound it felt like a sound in itself. It was the sound of a blast radius. Ben and I were left standing in the sunroom, two survivors at ground zero. The wicker furniture, the scattered cushions, the laptop on the coffee table, it all looked like debris. Ben finally moved, sinking onto the sofa and staring at the floor, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He didn't look like my fiancé anymore. He looked like a stranger I'd met in a fallout shelter. My whole life, he whispered, his voice raspy. My dad's face at my baseball games. He was never watching the game. He was always watching her. I thought he was just proud of her for being so involved, but he was managing her. He was always managing her. He looked up at me and his eyes were hollowed out pits of dawning horror. The time she told my 5th grade teacher I had a learning disability because I wasn't getting straight A's. She told me the teacher suggested it. The teacher was fired. I don't know what I thought. Every memory he had was now a potential lie, a scene from a play directed by a madwoman. He was an archaeologist of his own life, realizing every fossil he'd ever found was a fake. I wanted to go to him, to hold him, but my feet were rooted to the floor. My gaze kept sliding to the laptop. My truth teller, my anchor. It didn't feel like an anchor anymore, it felt like a detonator. My hobby, my rebellion against the fog of Alzheimer's, had brought a different kind of fog rolling in, one of suspicion and poison. I thought of my little cameras, the ones she'd laid out on my pillow like a threat. My memory catchers. The name felt obscene now. They hadn't caught a memory, they had set a trap. They had preserved a truth so toxic it had burned a family down to the foundations. For the first time, I felt a kinship with my grandmother's disease. She lost her memories, piece by piece, until her life was a blank page. Ben had just had his torn from him, every page rewritten in a sick, twisted hand. Which was worse? To forget or to learn that everything you remember is a lie? The wedding, of course, was not going to happen. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. The pristine white dress was a casualty, a symbol of a purity that never existed. I looked at Ben, this man I loved, who was now adrift in the wreckage of his own past, and I felt a surge of cold, terrifying responsibility. I had pulled the pin on this grenade to save us. But we were still standing in the crater, covered in the fallout, and I had no idea if the life we had planned could ever grow here again. The truth was supposed to set you free, but as I stood there in the deafening silence, all I felt was trapped. 2 days passed in a haze of phone calls, canceled vendors, and the stilted, painful navigation of our new reality. The silence in the house was no longer a vacuum, it was a weight. Arthur returned, not as the defeated man who had left, but as someone quieter, harder, and strangely more present than I had ever seen him. He and Ben spent hours talking, piecing together a lifetime of manipulated memories. I gave them space, but I listened to the low murmur of their voices, the sound of a father and son truly meeting for the first time. On the 3rd morning, Arthur found me in the kitchen, staring at the sterile police report from the second call-out. It detailed Margaret's threats and the psychiatric hold. It was a fact, it was proof, but it felt incomplete. He told you it was wedding drama, Arthur said, his voice calm. He'd overheard me telling Ben about my first visit to the station. I nodded, my throat tight. He told me not to start a war. He was wrong, Arthur said, his eyes meeting mine. They were clear and resolute. The war was already raging. He just refused to see the battlefield. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Ben and I are going into the city to speak with a lawyer. But first, there is something we need to do. All 3 of us. An hour later, we walked back into the small brick police station. The same officer was at the front desk, his shoulders slumped in the same weary posture. He recognized me instantly, and a look of profound annoyance crossed his face. "Ma'am, I thought I told you." "You did," Arthur cut in, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that made the officer straighten up. "You told my daughter-in-law to go home and handle a crime as a messy family drama. I'd like to speak with your supervising officer, now." We were led not to the windowless interrogation room, but to a small, cluttered office belonging to a Captain Davis, a man with graying hair and shrewd, tired eyes. The first officer stood awkwardly in the corner, a sullen storm cloud of a man. Arthur didn't wait to be asked. He laid out the facts with the cold precision of a surgeon. 2 days ago, Alara came to this station to report a crime. She had video evidence. Your officer, he gestured with his chin at the man in the corner, dismissed her. He advised her that pursuing justice would only make everything worse. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Well, it did get worse. Because your department failed to act, my wife felt emboldened. She escalated. She broke into a private room, she sent written threats, and she became physically violent, requiring 2 of your other officers to intervene and place her on a psychiatric hold. We have the report. He slid the second police report across the desk to Captain Davis, alongside my phone showing Margaret's text. Your officer didn't see a crime in progress. He saw an inconvenient woman. His failure to recognize a clear pattern of premeditated aggression and intimidation directly led to a violent domestic event that his colleagues then had to contain. The captain's eyes flicked from the report to the sullen officer, his jaw tight. This isn't about one ruined dress, Arthur concluded, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, more powerful. It's about a system that trains its officers to see a woman with evidence as a hysteric and a clear pattern of psychological abuse as drama. I lived with that drama for 30 years because I too was taught to see it as normal. No more. I want to know what you are going to do to ensure the next person who walks in here with a story like hers isn't sent back into the arms of their abuser with a pat on the head. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of Arthur's question. Captain Davis looked at the reports, at the video I had queued up on my laptop, at the transformed man in front of him. He sighed, a sound of deep institutional weariness. But it wasn't a dismissal. It was a concession. You're right, he said, his gaze firm. He turned to the officer. You're on desk duty until you've completed a mandatory retraining course on domestic coercive control. And our whole precinct is getting a refresher. This was mishandled. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. It wasn't a firing, it wasn't a lawsuit, but standing there beside Ben and this new formidable Arthur, it felt like a victory. We had forced the system to look at its own reflection in our shattered lives and admit that it was flawed. We had taken the truth, that terrible, beautiful, destructive thing, and used it not just to tear down, but to build a single, stronger brick in the wall for the next person. It wasn't a new beginning, but it was a start. 3 months later, the house was finally quiet. The frantic energy of the wedding that wasn't had long since dissipated, leaving behind an unfamiliar calm. The first few weeks were a blur of logistics and lawyers. Margaret was moved to a private long-term psychiatric facility. Her diagnosis was a string of clinical terms that boiled down to a personality forged in deep-seated trauma and narcissism. She refused to see any of us. In a way, it was a mercy. Our healing began not in a therapist's office, but around Arthur's mahogany desk. It became our sanctuary. Every Wednesday night, the 3 of us would sit in his study, not to litigate the past, but to carefully rebuild it. Arthur would pull out old photo albums and for the first time tell the real stories behind the pictures. He spoke of a quiet fishing trip where Ben caught his first trout, a memory Margaret had rewritten into a chaotic weekend where she'd been the hero who saved them from a storm. Ben listened, his expression a mixture of pain and wonder, rediscovering a father he never really knew. I would sit and listen, a quiet witness, my presence no longer that of an intruder, but an anchor. I was the one who had held up the mirror, and they were the ones brave enough to look. One cool Saturday afternoon, Ben came to me holding a garment bag. Not the pristine white one, but a gray, evidence-marked bag from the police station. Inside was the ruined dress. We hadn't known what to do with it. It felt wrong to throw it away, like letting her have the last word. We took it to the cliffside overlooking the ocean, the spot where he had proposed. We can't start our life on this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But we can't pretend it didn't happen either. I nodded, understanding completely. I reached into the bag and with a small pair of scissors, I carefully cut a small, perfect square of lace from the sleeve, a section her violence had missed. The rest of the dress we let the wind take from the cliffs, a white ghost dissolving into the spray. Later, I placed the small square of lace in a simple silver frame. It wasn't a memento of the wedding we lost, but a testament to the truth we found. It sits on the mantelpiece in our new, much smaller apartment, a reminder that some things are beautiful not because they are perfect, but because they survive. Last week on Arthur's birthday, we were in his garden. He was showing me his roses, his hands, once perpetually clenched in silent tension, now gentle and sure among the thorns. Ben was grilling, humming a tune, the sound easy and light. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over everything, and the moment was so simple, so genuinely happy it made my chest ache. In my pocket, I felt the smooth, cool shape of a small cube, a new memory catcher. Ben had given it to me. I hadn't used it yet. The impulse rose in me, the old habit of preservation. For a second, I felt a flash of the old fear, the weight of holding a record, the potential for it to become a weapon. But as I looked at the two men I loved, their faces relaxed and open in the golden light, I understood. The cameras were never the problem. The problem was the secrets. I walked over to the small patio table and placed the camera down, not hidden in a corner, but right in the center next to the salt shaker. Its tiny lens blinked, openly, honestly. Ben caught my eye from the grill. He didn't make a joke. He just gave me a slow, quiet smile, a look of complete and utter trust. He knew I wasn't setting a trap. I was cherishing a memory. I was finally using my rebellion not against decay, but in the service of joy. A year later, we stood on that same cliffside overlooking the ocean. The air was crisp, tasting of salt and new beginnings. There were only 4 of us, Ben, me, Arthur, and the woman officiating our marriage. I wore a simple, elegant ivory dress that fell to my knees, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers Ben had picked that morning. It was nothing like the grand affair we had planned, and it was 1,000 times more perfect. Before we began, Arthur, looking 10 years younger in a simple linen shirt, pointed to a weathered wooden post near the edge of the cliff. "Put one of your little sentinels there, Alara," he said, and the smile that reached his eyes was one of genuine warmth. "It has the best view in the house." I pulled the tiny camera from the pocket of my dress. A year ago, this act would have been furtive, a secret measure of self-preservation. Now, in the bright open sunlight, it felt like a declaration. I placed it on the post, its lens aimed at the small space where we would make our vows. It wasn't a hidden watcher, it was an invited guest. Ben caught my eye and squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the chasm we had crossed to get to this simple, honest moment. There was no talk of stains or secrets. Arthur, our only witness, didn't give a speech, but when the officiant asked who gave me to this man, he stepped forward and simply said, "She comes as she is, a woman of truth, and we are all better for it." I started collecting moments because I was terrified of the quiet, passive decay of memory, the fog that stole my grandmother. What Margaret taught me, in the most brutal way imaginable, is that memory can also be actively murdered, twisted into a weapon. But what I learned from Ben and Arthur in the quiet healing year that followed is the third most important lesson, that memory can be cultivated. You can consciously choose what to plant in the garden of your past. You can choose what to preserve. My memory catchers are no longer an insurance policy against lies. They are a celebration of truth, not just the ugly, world-shattering truths, but the small, quiet, life-affirming ones. The truth of Arthur's easy laughter. The truth of Ben's hand in mine. The truth of this perfect, windswept afternoon. The square of lace from my first dress still sits in its frame in our apartment, a reminder that the most beautiful things are not those that are untouched by hardship, but those that have endured it. The truth didn't just set us free, it showed us what had been imprisoning us all along. And finding our way out of that prison, together, is the only memory that truly matters. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of holding on to the truth, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you can imagine, especially now, as we begin to build our own new collection of moments.